Are you going to get a meeting with the president in the Oval Office? This seems to be going pretty well for Democrats all of a sudden.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You got he hits it off great with Mamdani. He's calling Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor. I mean, it's hard to know where he's going to go. But at this point, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Are we in a bizarro state of politics in the United States? What do we call this?
I mean, you never know with Trump. He's all over the map. But I do think, sort of from a policy standpoint, he and the Republicans, they've been focused on a lot of things this week other than health care. They need to get back on that because the time runs out at the end of the year and the ACA tax credit extensions expire. So, they've only got about 5 or 6 weeks. And that's probably about 10 or 11 legislative days left to get this done.
One of the things that we've seen your colleagues on the Hill is that they've been scared to embrace Mamdani, particularly before he won. Schumer never really came out and endorsed him. Jeffries only did, just days before the election. What does sort of this rapport we saw in the Oval Office, what does this mean for Mamdani's standing in the National Democratic Party?
Well, I'm not sure, but the interesting thing is that the Republican Party had been trying to set him up as the new boogeyman for them to attack. In fact, we spent part of today and yesterday with House Republicans attacking socialism and socialists and him by name in some instances. So, if Trump's kind of taken that off the table, I don't really know where that goes. But, at the end of the day, Mamdani ran and won on an affordability agenda, which kind of matches up in some ways with what happened in Virginia and New Jersey. Democrats won those gubernatorial races. They're not making the policy, promises that Mamdani's made, about free grocery or free transportation and the like. But I think what the American voters are really interested in right now is, rent's too high, groceries are too high. I can't afford anything. I feel like I'm struggling to keep my head above water. Politicians in Washington and here in the state's capitals, what are you doing to fix that? That's the key part for this upcoming cycle.
So, Congressman, do you believe President Trump when you hear him praise Mamdani and say that he wants to help him succeed? And if that's the case, doesn't this blow a big hole in the Republican campaign in the midterms in which they wanted to use Zohran Mamdani as a bit of a scapegoat here? And now President Trump says he's ready to move back to New York.
I mean, who knows? What's going on?
Do you take him at his word?
Yeah. I think it's a fair point that, the Republican political structure was really trying to set up Mamdani as, the scary point of attack, essentially, for the American people and trying to link Democrats to him and his socialist policies or whatever. If Trump is signaling and actually saying that maybe he's a good guy and we're going to work together, I think that does make it much more difficult for them to try and go forward with that. But ultimately, I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's really going to come down to the prices of what it costs to live here and who's trying to do what to fix it. That's the key, I think, for the next cycle.
We're in this era of very, very divisive politics. We just came out of a record-long shutdown where Trump was not even talking to Democrats. But in this meeting, we mentioned affordability. You just mentioned as well as crime and housing as being issues that Trump seemed interested in working on. Does this hand Democrats on the Hill a playbook of how they could potentially work with this White House?
Well, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot that's been going on that the White House has been driving through OMB and other departments and agencies. The Department of Justice, I think, is running completely amok. And I think DOD under Hegseth's leadership is definitely off track. So we'll see if he can get them back on, moving in the right direction. The OMB attacks on government employees, I think, has been damaging. And now that so many of them are gone, I think it's over 200,000 have been pushed out of government. I think the American people are starting to see the downsides of that and the services that they're not getting and the like. So I think Trump's making a pivot. I think he saw from that Tuesday election in New Jersey and Virginia, 2.5 weeks ago, that he needed to get back on track and focus on the things that the American people care about. Backing off of the tariffs is another big piece, I think, that he tried to do a little bit of last week, although the 10% across the board tariffs are still in place. But the American people have figured out that that's making groceries cost more. So he's trying to back away from that too. So we'll see if he continues moving in my view, the right direction. But I wouldn't count on it.
Congressman, I'll remind our viewers and listeners that you spent a career before you got into politics as a lawyer and as a prosecutor. And I have to ask you about what comes next here in the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Now that that discharge petition has cleared your chamber with only one no vote, sailed through the Senate, President signed it, a 30-day clock is ticking. But we keep hearing that the language in this legislation effectively allows the Department of Justice to withhold those files in light of an ongoing investigation, as the president has ordered into any number of Democrats, including Bill Clinton. You put your old prosecutor hat on. Are there other levers that Democrats on Capitol Hill can pull to compel the release of these documents?
Well, I think we have to force them to own up to what those investigations, quote unquote, might actually entail. My sense is that they're probably going to be pretty much smoke screens and fishing expeditions. They're aimed at trying to drag out the release of the files and the documents. But I think the reason you saw that vote in the House, was it 427 to 1 or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Was that the American people are like, you know what, just release the files. We'll see what's in there. We'll draw our own conclusions and stop dragging your feet. If he continues to drag his feet, I think it's going to undermine him even more. He's underwater, he being Trump, in the polling very significantly. There's a series of factors that are coming together to push him down. The Epstein files is one. The failure to keep his promises about pushing down prices is another. And I think a lot of the apparent corruption-looking stuff, like some of the things that the $2 billion that went to the guy that he pardoned, or came from the guy that he pardoned, I think those are starting to add up and make, especially independent voters, have some buyer's remorse and think about moving in a different direction.
Given that the White House has been very reticent on this issue, do you think that we'll see substantive documents before Christmas? And what can Congress do to keep that pressure up?
Yeah, they'll release some documents, but, because I think that's part of the game, try and drag it out. But what we've seen so far in this past year or so is that the legs aren't going away on this story, so all they do by dragging it out is just extend the pain that's being inflicted on the Trump White House by himself and other Republican allies. And the vote in the House, I think, certainly suggests that they're not going to be running interference for him either in the House Republican caucus. So I think if he keeps dragging it out, he's just going to hurt himself more. And I think the Democrats, we'll keep the pressure up, but you've got Republicans doing that now too. So I think it'll be a rare bipartisan push like no other that we've seen in recent times for him to get off the dime, get the documents out, stop playing games, make it public so the American people can decide for themselves.
You've mentioned health care a couple of times in our conversation, Congressman. There's still no deal, a promised vote in the Senate, but nothing to vote on. If this doesn't get fixed, do we shut down again at the end of January?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think I'd be shocked if the Republicans didn't try and come up with something to try and address this, because you've got 22 million people who are, counting on having their health care coverage through the Affordable Care Act. If you're doubling and tripling their rates, I think that's going to be enormously damaging to the Republican Party, because they know at this point the Democrats are the ones pushing for some kind of change. And this is another one where you're starting to see Republicans come over and say, well, maybe we can have a one-year extension or something along those lines. Only a handful so far, but you're going to have a lot of angry voters out there. And come January 1, the rates go up in a way that is hard to push back down. I don't know why they want to, not try and avoid that train wreck, but they seem to be failing to get something done. They haven't gotten a great proposal on the table, as you suggested. There's been a lot of conversations, including from the president, about really, broad plans about some kind of changes, but nothing specific. And we don't have a lot of time to sort of hash out, grandiose efforts. So if they're going to do something, they need to do it quick or suffer the consequences.
Democrats also haven't yet put out their plan of exactly what they'd like to vote on. What do you want to see in that health care plan?
Well, actually, we did. There's a discharge petition that Mr. Jeffries offered And discharge petition is a way to force a vote on a piece of legislation, even if the speaker and it hasn't been passed out of a committee, so the majority hasn't sanctioned it. That's actually what happened with the Epstein files. We're trying to use that same playbook again and put that out there. That's for a 3-year extension. And the thinking of a 3-year extension on the Affordable Care Act is it would actually give us time to try and work something out. If the Republicans have really big plans that are going to take time to put together, they might need 3 years to do it. On the other hand, if there's something we could resolve quicker, if you got the 3 years out there, it doesn't have to stay the 3 years if you pass new legislation to replace it. But let's do something. The Democrats have the 3-year proposal out there. You may recall, too, during the government shutdown, Schumer put out a 1-year proposal with a task force aimed at trying to work out some sort of resolution. Not only did Republicans rejected that, they called it stupid and, were really denigrating about it. So let's see what they do. But we've got something on the table. They don't.